As I look back on the Dead Space series, I love detail in art. I could appreciate it. I can see the work that goes behind it. I can see that you have to have a certain skill set in order to make that happen. So I could appreciate the first two Dead Space games and the hard work and the meticulous work that went into it. How much the first two games were such intricate masterpieces. They were designed down to the details of lighting, storytelling, creature design. It was such a joy not only to play the game, but to look at the detail on how much they cared about this character, this unknown franchise when it first got started. To see the reflection of the light coming from the suit onto the walls showed such passion and love for what they were making. Dead Space 1 and 2 were psychological horrors. It didn't use jump scares so much, but it kept you in the limbo of what was real and what was not. It took space and then turned it into something upside down, into the space of a mental thinking or the mental workings of people. It took the unknown of a discovery and you explored the mystery of where that discovery was going. So when you were in this game, you had no basis to ground where it was going. That's what made it so much fun. It wasn't your typical slasher horror game. It was more suspenseful, more mysterious, and more of a journey. This brings us to our topic today. Dead Space 3 Revisited. I played Dead Space 3 when it first came out. To tell you the truth, I didn't like it one bit. I didn't even finish it. I put it down. I couldn't stand what they were doing to something that was beautiful and then putting graffiti on it and saying this is more beautiful. It didn't make sense to me. But as I played the game recently again, I realized what was happening. I realized what went wrong. And I realized from all the things that I'm seeing on the gaming platforms today, Dead Space was a victim of its own success. So follow me as we go back and I tell you what really happened to Dead Space 3. Dead Space 3 came out in February of 2013. It was a game that followed the success of two other games in this three-part series, Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2. Dead Space 1 was a groundbreaker. It changed the gaming community and how we viewed how games should work. And from that success of the first one, the second one came out. And to me, it was a masterpiece, a perfect blend of horror, suspense, intense mystery, and just that little bit of sprinkling of action and the right moment to keep you on your toes. This brings us to Dead Space 3. I told you when Dead Space succeeded, it brung a lot of notoriety to this game. Thus, a lot of eyes on the game. And thus, when you have a lot of eyes on a game, you have a lot of opinions on a game. The people, when they first made Dead Space, it was their version of what it could be, horror could be. Nobody could tell them otherwise because they're creating a Picasso. You can't tell somebody this is how it should look when they're first designing a Picasso. So, when they first see the success of this game, people start to come out the woodwork. When money starts to flow, you have a lot of best friends. And when you have a lot of best friends, you also have a lot of opinions that go along with that. And this is shaping up to tell you what happened to Dead Space 3. There was nothing really fancy about Dead Space 1. It was true to its core, a mystery, a man trying to save his wife. And then we discover that mystery, and then it gets deeper. And then watching the man survive to the end. This was what it was about. There was nothing really complicated about it. So what went wrong? What made Dead Space 3 such a bad game? Why do I say bad? Because if it was a good game, trust me, they would have made 3 more games since Dead Space 3 came out. But 2013, and we hear nothing. We hear rumors. We hear that they could be doing something, or that something's coming. But to tell you the truth, Dead Space 3 ruined the franchise. And that's just a fact. So, what went wrong? People started to have input on how the game should be. Just like Resident Evil 6, how it left the core factors of what fear and horror was and went to a more action-based game. The fans that actually made the game successful left the game. It's as simple as that. The fans that made the game successful left the game because it wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't what they saw in the first one. When you picked up the game, you weren't expecting to play an action game like a Tomb Raider game or any other sort of action game. No, you wanted to play this horror game. And that's what happened. Dead Space 3 started having so many opinions on it, on how the game should be made, and how the trend of upward moving the trend lines of a game successful. That's how corporations look at things. How can we keep the trend line of this game being better and more marketable to other people? That's when corporations started saying, how can we make this more palatable to the masses? Thus, they limited the action base. They limited the horror base and became more action based. When you saw Dead Space 3, you instantly knew it wasn't the same game. Cutscenes that took you out of the game, instantly taking control of the game to have you do a press button here, an action turn here. No. That's what happened to Dead Space. People started to add things to it that were never part of the original. And this is what's happening a lot today in games today. Dead Space was just ahead of its time. Today I see on most social platforms, how the gamers are really aware of how the corporations are taking advantage of successful games and marketing them in a way that takes away from the game. And that's what happened to Dead Space. Dead Space was being systematically Frankenstein into something it originally wasn't. Slowly but surely, Dead Space was turning into an action game rather than a horror game. We could go on about the game and corporations and the opinions of people and how they started to slowly pick apart what made the game successful. But there's also more to it than that. The game started to change in ways how the characters were, even the original arc started out. Isaac wasn't an action hero. He wasn't a guy who was angry or a character that was lost. Isaac was a stoic character that we saw his actions, that he was driven for the love of his wife, and we saw what he would do. He was basically pushed to the edge of madness, but he kept on going for the love of his wife, to find out who she was and where she was and how he could help. It was a love story that you didn't have to see the love behind it. But in Dead Space 3, we see infighting. We see Isaac losing it. We see people bickering. We see all these things that detract from the game that have nothing to do with the game. So the characters have changed so much from the first one. Again, this is where people or opinion started to add something to the game that wasn't a part of the original. Maybe we should have him have a deeper love interest, or maybe we should have him go fight for this, or maybe and then when you do that, guess what? You leave what made the game work in the first place, and you change the character to something that he wasn't in the first place, so dramatically, so drastically, and without deep thought process of what the original character was and who the people originally liked, and you turn him into something that was unrecognizable. Guess what? You have the fans of the first one leave. So in conclusion, what happened to Dead Space? Dead Space was a product of its own success. It was ahead of its time. It was the beginning of corporate money being injected to try to boost the game's sales when it wasn't necessary. It was people starting to come to the game, adding their opinions onto it that weren't a part of the first one. It's the designers who started to be relegated to the back room because of the success of the game, and other people who were probably more successful in their eyes could do a better job. This is, sorry to say, it's an old story, but it's on a new platform, a new design, a digital age. But with the new platform, people are becoming more aware as gamers start to realize that their games are being basically commandeered by people who have no love for the game. And Dead Space 3 was a product of that. The game was basically hijacked by people who had no love for the original. And that's why the year 2019, a game that was monumental in success in the first two, could not make a game since 2013. Since 2013, we haven't had a Dead Space game. And that's kind of sad, isn't it? So if you ever look back to your games you love, let's keep it simple. Let's keep it to the core. That's what happened with the new Resident Evil remake. They went back to the core, what made that game successful. And look what happened. It became such a success. People raved about it because they went back to what made the game successful. And that's what has to happen to Dead Space 3. I mean, not Dead Space 3. That's what's going to happen. Has to happen to a new Dead Space if it comes out. They have to go back to their core. Everything that made that game successful. So in the end, Dead Space 3, I'm sorry to say, is a sad product of an old thinking that you can make something better when it was already good enough. Thank you.